Okay, so welcome to Intro to WCAG. This is the second of 4 sessions in Level 1 training, as you know. Who has heard of WCAG? Put up your hands if you have. Not bad, not bad. Well, you're going to learn about it. So, important, right? What does WCAG have to do with CIBC Digital? Well, first of all, we need to know what is WCAG, right? Well, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, aka WCAG, are a set of guidelines that, when followed, should help produce accessible digital content for people with disabilities. So what does that mean? What does that mean in digital? Well, it means it applies to everyone in digital. So that would include, first of all, that would apply to everything in digital. So that's web, mobile web, native apps, electronic documents, including Excel, PowerPoint, etc. And as I said, it also applies to everybody at digital. So that includes the business analysts, the content creators, including lines of business, designers, developers, and of course, testers like you folks. So compliance-wise, well, digital actually has to be compliant to certain levels of WCAG. And the reason is, first of all, it's a good experience for users who have disabilities or not. But second of all, and I would say this is the less important reason, but a very important reason still, is that it's a legal issue. So we could actually have lawsuits filed against us if we don't follow WCAG. So it can lead to human rights complaints and lawsuits under the Human Rights Act, the Accessible Canada Act, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which is AODA. So it means that we needed to have been compliant up to level A of WCAG. So WCAG has 3 levels of compliance, level A, AA, and AAA. So we needed to be compliant by January 1st, 2014. And we need to meet level A by January 1st, 2021. So does that mean we sit around and don't make things level AA compliant now? Of course not. So how do we plan to meet WCAG here at Digital? There's actually a document called MG6, which is the Inclusive Design Standard for Application User Interface. And that actually outlines our guidelines at Digital. Has anyone ever heard of it? Hands up. Yeah, okay. It is on CIBC today. And it is, I would say, pretty technical language or pretty dense language. It's very, kind of legalese-ish. But it's a good document to be able to, say, refer lines of business or vendors to or something like that, in case they're wondering, well, does CIBC really have to follow these WCAG standards? So we need to meet the level A, so the first level of compliance now and in fall, of course. But, and this is what I referred to before, we need to now meet level AA compliance. Because of course, if we waited till January 1st, 2021, we're not going to make everything compliant in a day. So that means anything new and anything that has a significant refresh. So an app or a web page that has significant changes sent to it. We also set some higher standards at Digital, and like an example would be plain language, which is actually a level AAA in WCAG, because it's just important for all our clients really to have things in simple, straightforward language. So what does WCAG cover? Has anyone actually opened up WCAG and looked at it? No, okay, well it's actually really quite dense and hard to follow. So I could understand if you might have opened it and closed it immediately. But this is where our team is here to help. So today we're going to cover an overview of WCAG. So we're going to cover some of the main ones, the main guidelines that apply to digital. And this includes ones that maybe apply to developers or designers. But it's good for all the teams, and all the teams are getting the same training to understand a little bit about each other's jobs, right? So when you hear like, oh, they're making this change to this page, or someone's raised a defect, or whatever, you'll have a better understanding of why it has to happen, right? Why it needs to be fixed, because it's not maybe meeting a WCAG guideline. So first of all, assistive technology, that would be the first guideline, and it's kind of the most basic, high-level, obvious one, which is users of assistive technology, also known as AT, must be able to access all content and complete all tasks that other users can. For example, ensure that anything that can be done with a mouse can be done with a keyboard. Proper markup. So this is kind of dev related. Use correct coding techniques. So on the left is a very simple example of, let's say, a web page. And this is a very important news story about how Super Bear saved the day. And let's say this is the code that goes behind it. So you need to use proper coding techniques because it provides structure and meaning. So for example, the heading has to have a heading tag. Lists have to have the list tag. So the reason for this would be, for example, a screen reader user is going to know that something is a list or know something is a heading because it will be announced to them by the screen reader if it's coded correctly. The language needs to be declared on the web page. So in the example on the left, the EN stands for English, obviously, right? So that's setting the language for the page. But also the example on the right, that's an example where the page is in English, but then there's a short bit of text, for example, that's in French. So that also needs to be tagged. So the reason for that is that it will not be pronounced correctly if it's not tagged as French. And I like to joke around that it will sound like Pepe Le Pew, and if anyone knows who Pepe Le Pew is, he has a terrible French accent, and that's what it will sound like. So I actually have a video example.
Welcome. Accessible University left parent AU right parent is a fictional university and this is its fictional homepage. This page is designed to demonstrate a variety of common web. Bienvenido. Accessible Universidad left parent UA right parent es una universidad ficticia. Y esta es su página de ficción. Esta página está diseñada para demostrar una verdad de común. Heading Level 2. Bienvenido. Accesible Universidad abre paréntesis UA cierra paréntesis es una universidad ficticia y esta es su página de ficción. Esta página está diseñada para demostrar una variedad de común.
So I don't know if you know Spanish, but it definitely sounds better probably to all of your ears, the second one, right? So clearly the first one had not been identified as Spanish, the language. So sections and headings. You need to divide up the content. So if you look at this example, it's a big block of dense text, which is difficult for anyone to approach. It's got one heading, it's got one subheading, that's okay. But this other example, it's broken up with more headings. So for anyone, it's easier to access the content you want because you can look for the heading and find it. So the same thing works with a screen reader, especially because they will often search by heading. So instead of having to go through all the content, like the first example, to find the information they need, they can just navigate by heading and find that information quickly. It's also really good for people with a cognitive disability, for example, who would find possibly that text on the left very intimidating. So those headings provide structure and make it easier to navigate, right? So I have another quick example.
Hi, this is Jeremy from SSB, and today we're going to talk about how screen reader users navigate websites using heading commands. So if I hit my H key here, the screen reader will be notified that there are headings on this page, and it will tell me what the first heading is. I'm going to hit H here.
News heading level 2 link.
And there's the news section. So by all means, I should be able to down arrow here and read the page as I normally would, and there should be some news articles.
Link troops called to rescue amid Colorado floods.
There we go. Okay, so there is a news story, and I could activate that link if I wanted, but I want to see what else is here on the headings, so I'm going to hit the H key again.
Sports heading level 2 link.
And then it jumped me past the news section all the way down to the sports section just with one keystroke. And we'll verify where we are.
Link follow : Fiork takes aim at historic ground.
Okay, so we are actually in the sports section now.
Entertainment heading level 2 link.
Then I press H and I'm now on the entertainment section. So this is one really cool way. They've really designed this page to take advantage of jumping around between headings, as I mentioned before, like headlines in a newspaper. They denote sections rather than just making the text look big and beautiful. This actually has a purpose. With the proper design, headings can be an integral part of how a screen reader user can get the most out of navigating websites.
And skip links. So if you don't use keyboard only, if you use a mouse, you may never encounter the skip links. But screen reader users, people who use keyboard only, maybe they can't physically use a mouse, will find this very useful. And I'll show you why.
This is a demonstration of some of the difficulties users have who cannot use a mouse. This demonstrates the problem of having to move through repetitive navigation. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the Accessible U link. Now that I'm there, I'll press Enter. So as I read this page, I see a link near the bottom that I want to go to called Inaccessible Homepage. So to get there, I'll start pressing the Tab key again. So now I'm there and I'll press Enter. Now I'll go back a page. So now let's say I want to go to the link that says accessibility problems. I'll start pressing Tab again. And hit Enter. Here are these same pages again, just this time with a skip to main content link implemented. Again, I'm going to go to the Accessible U link. The first time I come to this, I'm going to ignore it because I don't want to skip to the main content yet. Now this time, when I want to go to the link for Inaccessible Homepage, when I come to skip to main content, I can click it, and now I'm down in the main content already, and I didn't have to navigate through all of the menu navigation again. I can go back. As you can see, the skip to main content link saved me a number of clicks.
So I think it was 29 clicks versus 5 clicks, right? I went to a conference once where they demoed, it was a retail site, kind of like Amazon, and it took over 100 clicks to get to the buy button. So you can imagine if someone can only use the keyboard and is tabbing, that's terrible. And reading order. So let's say this is an example of a mock-up, and it's showing the flow for the app. So this is the order that the designer is imagining the user should experience the content. And then imagine that it's been coded differently, so it's in a different order. So let's say I'm a low vision user, and I'm using my screen reader, and I'm swiping to go from element to element on the page. But the focus is moving around the screen in a different order from what I can see visually. And low vision users will often use screen readers. So this is a very confusing experience, right? So it just means that the coding has to match what the design shows. Consistent navigation and identification. So imagine this example on the left is a website, and there are these are the two web pages from that website. And you can see the page 1 shows horizontal navigation, and then page 2 shows vertical navigation. So can anyone guess why might this not be a great experience? Who might this be difficult for? Is it confusing maybe? Imagine if you have a cognitive disability, how confusing that could be. So you've gone to the first page, you've taken maybe a bit of time to figure out the setup of the page due to your cognitive disability, and then you go to the next page and it's completely different and you have to relearn. Or you're a screen reader user. And so it takes a bit more time to work around that page and figure out what's going on, and then the next one's different. So the example on the right, of course, is consistent navigation. In this case, they're both horizontal. So you want those multiple pages within your website to have the same consistency. And along the same lines, you need consistent identification. So for example, if you had buttons, in the first example, there's a move button, a delete button, and maybe an add button. The add button is a symbol. The other two are not symbols. One of them has square edges, one has rounded edges. So this can be very confusing, again, to someone who has a cognitive disability. I think all of us get used to how our go-to website looks, right? We know that, say, the submit button is always at the bottom right and it's always blue or whatever it is. And then if they introduce a new flow to that website and it's different and the button's in a different place and it looks different, it's a bad experience for all of us. But then that's just multiplied with someone who maybe has a learning disability. So the more consistent example below that, where they're all the same look, they're all text, they're all round edge boxes, better experience. So readability. So we're going back to that plain language guideline that I mentioned before. So in this example, entitled Unnecessarily Complex Example, it says CPP. In the event of a vehicular collision, a company-assigned representative will seek to ascertain the extent and cause of damages to property belonging to all parties involved. Anyone want to translate that one? Right? It's really hard to follow. And blah, 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 there's more. But here, you can use bullet lists. You can shorten that text. You can include diagrams to make it clearer. So if it's hard for us, it's going to be hard for someone with a learning disability or cognitive disability. So we can employ a lot of different plain language techniques to make it more accessible to everybody. It just needs to be easy to understand. So meaningful links and buttons. So we want unique links and buttons. So in this example, entitled Unclear Link Text Examples, we've got a bunch of different links within some bullets. So for example, we've got click here, 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 read more, register, register. So why do you think this might be problematic? The way these links are worded.
They're using the same words over and over again.
Yeah, they're using the same words over and over again. So a screen reader user might actually navigate using tab or going link by link. So all they're going to hear is click here, link, etc. And if they're looking for a particular link, of course, this is not going to work for them. They're going to actually have to arrow down and listen to all the content to know what link they want to find. And then in the usable link text example, more descriptive, right? So instead of click here, we have instructions for the new Penn State web tool. So if I know that's what I want to access, I know I select that one. So they each need to be unique and descriptive. You can do that by making it a good descriptive link. As in this example, you can add in text if necessary. It's not ideal, but that can happen too. But also they should stand out. So you can see in both cases, they're blue, they're in bold, and they're underlined. That's actually an extra step because you really need two different ways of displaying links. So let's say a different color and an underline. Okay, so the non-descriptive links video.
Orlando travel guide link linked. More link. Orlando tours and things to do. More link. Orlando attractions link. More link. Orlando travel guide link. More link. General information link. More link. Orlando, Florida videos link. More link.
There was the case that there were headings before each more, which is helpful, but it's not necessarily totally clear that those headings are related to those links. So again, just better to have them descriptive. And text alternatives, who knows what those are? So alt text would be another way of wording it. Yeah, lots of nods of head, okay. So decorative images, it's a little bit subjective, but if it's either not conveying any new information or it's purely just nice to look at and doesn't add anything, it can just have no alt text. So some people will say, oh, it doesn't need alt text, but technically it needs no alt text in the code. Contextual, so in this case, it's showing someone taking a picture of a check. So that's kind of instructional, right? Some people learn very well visually, so we want to keep that, even if maybe there are descriptions, steps of how to do it within the web page. So you would probably want to have the alt text there, again, unless it's really repeating what's already on the page. Data, well, of course, if it's a graph, we need to convey that information. There can be very complex graphs, which makes it really challenging. Like I've seen alt text where it was an X and Y axis, and there were a bunch of dots on it, and the description went like, the X-axis shows time, and the Y-axis shows money, and then it described that's crazy, right? So if it's simple, you could do a short alt text, 125 characters is usually the max we want. But then maybe include the information in a table, which then a screen reader user can access. So have the graph and the table. And then of course, image is text. So our logo, for example, is not text on the screen. The text within the logo is actually just an image. So you would need alt text that says CIBC logo, banking that fits your life. So there's a quick example.
Heading level 2. Image with no alt attribute. You are currently on a heading level 2. /example 1, 2, 3, JPG image. You are currently on an image. Heading level 2. Image with alt text. You are currently on a heading level 2. A small dog running across a grassy field, mouth open, ready to catch a tennis ball. Image. You are currently on an image.
Image with no alt attribute. Heading 2. Example 123 image. Image with alt text. Heading 2. A small dog running across a grassy field, mouth open, ready to catch a tennis ball.
Okay, so in the first two examples, I don't know if it was hard to follow because the screen reader was running for the whole page, right? But the first one just announced the source file name, which is what might happen if you haven't put in the alt text you need to. And then the second one, of course, described what the dog was doing, right? So color. You need to ensure sufficient color contrast. So in this example, on the left, you see that the type is very light gray on white background. I don't know if can everyone actually read it, even at the back? Or yeah, so, but just imagine if you have low vision, or some older people actually lose their ability to see color contrast. So then the example on the right, it's got sufficient color contrast. And there are very clear-cut ratios, what they need to be within WCAG. And color references. So in the left, you can see that it says required fields are in red, and it's showing a couple of text fields that need to be filled in. And one of them, the email, is in red. So why might this be a problem? Any thoughts? Who's this going to cause a problem for?
Colorblind.
Yeah, people who are colorblind. So they're not going to know which one is required and which one isn't. But then the simple addition of an asterisk in the example on the right, problem solved. They'll be able to see the asterisk. They'll know which one is required. And then similarly, right, this is a math question, because I used to be a math editor, so this one's for me. Does anyone actually know the answer, first of all? Which is the right angled triangle? Yeah, the green one. Number one in the example on the right. So, nicely done. So of course, if you're colorblind, the question on the left, you're not going to know how to answer that because you have no way to identify what the right answer is. You might know what the right answer is, but you can't pick it because the checkboxes are identified by color. But then in the example on the right, of course, it has the colors, but it also has the numbers. So they're going to be able to identify the right answer by the numbers. So resize and reflow. So for example, with text-only zoom, so this is just zooming text, not the whole page. Things like this can happen where the text is overlapping itself, that kind of thing. But it has to be actually possible to zoom in up to 200% for text-only zoom, for people who have low vision, for example. So this is the Royal Bank page, and this is actually using text-only, so oops, Royal Bank. But of course, this is what should have happened, which somebody here doctored up so we could show what Royal Bank really should have been doing. Total zoom. So this is the case where you're zooming in on the whole page. So you want to not compromise the integrity of the page. So you need that correct reflow. So I'll show this in video form. The images you just saw. So there's no audio for this. But you can see it zooming in. And it's retained its integrity, right? You can still read everything okay. The reflow is fine. So responsive and orientation. So we need to design for different viewports. So designers need to make clear to the developers how they need to do their work to make sure everything breaks correctly across lines, all that kind of thing. So orientation. So we need to make sure everything is accessible in both landscape and portrait orientation. Does anyone have any thoughts as to why? So in the last session, Intro to Accessibility, we showed images of people in wheelchairs who had their devices mounted, right? Yeah, so they can't actually change the orientation. So it has to be possible to access all the information either one way or the other way. So keyboard compatibility and focus. So this is kind of going back to the assistive technology guideline at the beginning, but it specifically talks about keyboard. Ensure that anything that can be done with the mouse can be done with the keyboard as well. This covers such a range of disabilities too. Screen reader users, people who have mobility issues, people who have tremors, all kinds of things. So this is really important and just kind of accessibility 101. And then visible focus. So who's familiar with focus? Yeah, a few people, a couple of people. So just imagine you can't use a mouse or you're using your keyboard only. And then think about when you point your mouse, you know where your mouse is on the screen, right? But if you're using keyboard only, tabbing let's say, how do you know where you are on the page? So in this example it shows an about link that has no box around it, whereas the services link does have a box around it, and that's showing the focus. That means that you've tabbed to that particular link.
Focus visible. This is a WCAG AA requirement, and this is about navigating a website with your keyboard and having a visual clue so you know where you are. I'm going to start tabbing through this site. See, as I go, we've got some lines around each element. I'm going to get to the menu. Menu's highlighted. I'm going to use Enter, and I can navigate through the menu items. So go through, I can get throughout the entire site, and I've got these visual prompts. I'm going to go to the new Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet site, and I'm going to do the same thing. And you can see that there are no focus visible elements, even though I'm tapping through. So this fails WCAG AA for this success criterion.
Sounds like she's getting angry with that, right? But you can see how confusing it is. You have no idea where you are when there's no focus. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Circle around the mouse pointer. Is that like
no, she's probably added. So the question was, there's a circle where showing where the mouse is. Yeah, so that's probably just to help with her demo. Yeah. So pointer gesture and cancellation. So there are actually a few new guidelines that came out with WCAG 2.1, and our team actually did a presentation on that, so some of you may know about some of this. But let's say you had a map on your phone, how would you zoom in on that map? Yeah, pinch and zoom, right? But what if you can't pinch and zoom? So that's where, I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, double tapping. What if you can't do that either, for example, right? So you can also include buttons. So in this case, you see it quite commonly now, right? A plus and minus, that kind of thing. So, because sometimes people actually connect their phones to a keyboard if they're unable to do the gestures on a screen. And this also applies, so in this case it's a map where you're pinching and zooming, but it also applies to, let's say, a slider where you have to slide your finger along. So they call that path-based gesture. And then a pinch and zoom would be a multi-point gesture because you're using more than one point. So yeah, I should clarify that double tap could be an alternative, but there also are cases where someone can't even do that gesture, just to clarify. So actions too. So this could be you're clicking down and something happens before you've even lifted your mouse. So this can be a problem, for example, with someone who has tremors, has Parkinson's, something like that. And just imagine that anytime you click down, something's already happened, and then you may have to cancel that event, that kind of thing. So it's just kind of very common anyway with design, but you want to make sure nothing happens until you click down and let go. So the mouse down and mouse down and mouse up events have to have happened. Yeah. And target size. So I'm sure you've all been on some website on your phone, and some button's been super tiny, and I like to challenge myself to hit it with like the corner of my pinky finger. Or the other alternative is you have to keep zooming in, pinching and zooming, then doing what you need to do, and then going back out because you need to see all the content. So it's a pain for all of us, but it's particularly a problem with someone who, say, doesn't have great fine motor skills, suffers from tremors again, something like that. Just make the target bigger, it's easier to hit. When it comes to links within a paragraph, though, there's actually an exception to that, because you can imagine if you made a link within a block of text very big, it throws everything on. So that is an exception. And multimedia, so audio and video. So you have to have these three things: captions, a transcript, and audio description with all your videos. So some aren't aware of that. They think, oh, you only need captions and a transcript. Does anyone know what an audio description is?
It's like someone describing the events that are happening.
Yes. So you're actually going to hear, if you're blind, you're going to hear all that's going on visually on the screen. So you can still play the video, and you can hear all the dialogue just like everybody else. So you're not losing that experience. But then you're also getting described to you all the actions that are going on. And some of them are actually really cool and so nicely written, it really enhances the movie and captures what's happening, the mood of what's happening. And if you want to check out a really cute one, the movie Frozen, if you go to YouTube, you can see you can hear the descriptive audio for that, and it's really good. So autoplay is not great. We definitely try to avoid this for a few reasons. So for example, if I suffer from migraines, a video starting up automatically can be very disruptive to me. It can actually trigger a migraine. Let's say you're autistic or ADHD. It can also be a really challenging experience for you. So we just want to avoid auto starting. Absolutely required is having the stop, pause, and play buttons. And of course those have to be accessible, so you have to be able to access those buttons with a keyboard. And forms and labeling. So clear labels. So in this case, it's an example of a few text boxes, and you can see that the labels are very close to the actual fields that you need to fill in. So this is important, and I'll show you why.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm with SSB BART Group. Today we'll be discussing a number of issues that affect users with low vision and users of screen magnification software. This is a very simple form. but it would pose a significant challenge to users of screen magnification software simply because the field labels visually are very distant from the fields themselves in screen magnification mode at, say, 4 times. As a screen magnification user is filling out this form, they would need to pan back and forth with the mouse left to right in order to verify that the label that they're selecting and the field that they're making a selection from are one and the same. One modification that can be made in the design of a form such as this is to provide alternating colors on rows. This would give a screen magnification user something visual that they could track as they move back and forth between the fields and the field labels. Of course, the preferable solution for a form such as this is simply to move the fields and the field labels close together. This would reduce or eliminate the necessity of the horizontal scrolling back and forth between the fields and the field labels. By minimizing the separation between the fields and the field labels, even at reasonably high magnifications, this would not be a problem, and the user would be able to reliably identify each field. So in these examples, we've provided web page designers and web developers with methods of designing and coding web pages and forms so that they can be more accessible by users of screen magnification software.
Yeah, so you can imagine if someone's got low vision and they're zooming right in, and I've seen people zoom in just to a few letters even, and then having to scroll and try to find where that form field is that goes with that label if it's very far apart. Extremely challenging, right? So label association. So this is obviously a coding related issue. Just have to make sure in the code that the label is associated with that form field. So that if I'm a screen reader user, I know that's the form field that goes with that label. I know what needs to go into that field. And clear instructions. So I'm sure you've had the case where you were filling in a form field, let's say it was a new password, and you put in the format that you usually use, not that you're supposed to reuse passwords, and it doesn't accept it. And then you have to do it again and again, because maybe it only says your password is not valid or something. It's a terrible experience and very frustrating. So just to have that instruction with that form label to tell you what format it needs to be in. And then bigger, more universal instructions for the whole form. So let's say you want to do a transfer. You spend a lot of time doing that whole transfer. Maybe you have a motor disability or cognitive disability. It takes you even longer to fill it out. And then you realize at the end that your transfer is not going to happen for 5 days and you needed it done in 1 day. So having instructions up front. And then error messages. So you can have pop-ups, you can have a list of the errors at the top of a web page. You can have inline errors where it appears just under the field if you've not filled it out or not filled it out correctly. There are various formats, but the important thing is that you identify the error, so what did the person do wrong, and how to fix it. And then you won't have that frustration I just mentioned with the password, where you have to keep guessing how to do it right. Session timeout. So just imagine that you're in a wheelchair or you have some kind of motor disability and you're working on your form and you didn't get those instructions up front, so you didn't know that you need your SIM card. So then you have to get yourself over to get your SIM card and come back, and by that time it's timed out and all your information is gone. Terrible experience again, right? So either provide that capability to extend the session, or ideally don't even have a timeout. I mean, of course that's sometimes a security issue, but this is something that is just going to be a better experience for everybody. So we're just right at the end. Does anyone have any questions? So what are the takeaways? So we've just covered some of the examples of what's in WCAG, just like high-level understanding of what's in there. And then you're going to have some level 2 training specifically for your discipline that will further help you in making sure what you do in your work meets our accessibility requirements. So stay tuned. We have a bunch of resources that we'll send out to you after. And again, we have our survey that we ask you to fill out just to let us know if we're helpful or not helpful. Hopefully we're helpful. But anyway, thank you so much for coming.